Okay, today we are going to study about the respiratory pigments. So far we've studied what is respiration, how it is done. We also studied that how the oxygen transport can occur. Okay, now we are going to start with the respiratory pigments, that how the oxygen molecules are carried through the or throughout the body. Now, the respiratory pigments in humans, they are basically the molecules which are responsible for either transport or storage of gases, especially the oxygen. कि किस तरह आपके पास ऑक्सीजन ट्रांसपोर्ट होता है फ्रॉम लंग्स टू द सेल्स और टिश्यूज, और या फिर देखिए यहाँ पे दो पॉइंट्स है, ट्रांसपोर्ट और स्टोरेज, कि फिर वो उन सेल्स या टिश्यूज में स्टोर भी अगर if a pigment or a molecule is storing them, that is also called as the respiratory pigment. Now most of the respiratory pigments are proteinaceous, ठीक है, they are protein in nature and they have a metallic ion. जिस तरह हीमोग्लोबिन में आपके पास iron is the metallic ion. Now there are two types of respiratory pigments within the humans. One is the hemoglobin and the other one is the myoglobin. Now, hemoglobin, it is basically a hollow enzyme protein, ठीक है, which is protein enzymes आपके पास दिखने हैं, they are proteinaceous in nature, and it is, ये जो word है hemoglobin का, इसको हम binary word बोलते हैं, means it is formed from a combination of two words. Now, the heme, ये जो heme है, ठीक है, this word heme, it represents the cofactor, which is the inorganic part or the non-protein part of this enzyme, okay, or the hollow enzyme. And the globin it represents the globular protein, okay. This globin is made from 4 polypeptide chains. Now, where do these hemoglobin occur? As you all know, or we've studied this before, that the RBCs have hemoglobin and they carry the oxygen, which was about 97% of the RBC has the hemoglobin. Now, what is the function of hemoglobin? It basically transports the oxygen, क्योंकि ये आपके पास RBC में present है, red blood cells में present है, तो ये क्या करता है कि the blood is carried throughout the body, so it carries the oxygen throughout the body. तो oxygen transport में help करता है from the lungs to the cells and the tissue. Now, coming to the composition of the hemoglobin. Basically, the hemoglobin has a globular protein part, which is made from 4 polypeptide chain. In yesterday's lecture, we have done this, that there are 2 alpha and 2 beta chains. अब हर अल्फा और हर बीटा चेन में आपके पास there is a heme component, ठीक है, तो which is the iron. So basically there are 4, because when you add these two plus 2 from the alpha and 2 from the beta, it gives you 4. Okay, so each of them has a heme group, so a total of 4 iron groups are present. This is the structure of the hemoglobin. ये देखें, this is a beta chain, this is a beta chain, 2 beta chains and 2 alpha chains. Now each of this has a heme group which has the iron in it. So you see, each of them has it, so it becomes 4 iron or 4 heme groups. Now the number of amino acids in these hemoglobin molecule is 574. Now coming to how many molecules of oxygen can bind to a single hemoglobin. So you see, there is this, the oxygen binds to this heme group, this iron. So there are 4. So automatically the 4 oxygen molecules will bind to a single hemoglobin molecule. The molecular mass is 64 kilodaltons. Now coming to the structure, it has a quaternary structure, okay, which has 2 or more proteins. Now the oxygen affinity, oxygen attraction, या कितना oxygen को ये attract कर सकता है, hold कर सकता है, bind कर सकता है, इसकी ऑक्सीजन एफिनिटी आपके पास हीमोग्लोबिन की स्लाइटली लेस है एज कंपेयर्ड टू द मायोग्लोबिन. अब ये क्यों है, ये मैं आगे आई विल एक्सप्लेन इट, ठीक है. नाउ ऑक्सीजन रिलीज किस प्रेशर पे ये ऑक्सीजन आपके पास रिलीज करता है, it releases the oxygen when the pressure is less than or it is 60 millimeters of mercury. जब प्रेशर इतना होगा तो जो हीमोग्लोबिन के पास यहाँ पे आपके पास जो ऑक्सीजन बाउंड होगा, ऑक्सीजन मॉलिक्यूल, वो डिसोसिएट हो जाएगा, इससे वो रिलीज हो जाएगा, ठीक है। There are two types of hemoglobin, type A and type F. There are other types, but they are the abnormal types. जो normal आपके पास है, these are the type A and F. Now coming to the myoglobin. This myoglobin, this term myo, it is always related to the muscles. So this myosin or ये जो आपके पास the term myo, it represents the myosin which is related or is present in the muscle. So it gives you the idea that these myoglobin respiratory molecule pigments are basically present in the muscles. Now it also has the protein part, which is the globin, which represents the globular protein. और इसमें भी आपके पास आयरन कंपोनेंट है या हीम कंपोनेंट है, लेकिन डिफरेंस क्या है दोनों में वो हम will see later on. Now coming to the occurrence, ये आपके पास, as I told you, the myo represents the term myosin, so they are which is present in the muscles. So these respiratory pigments are also present in the muscle. Now the function is basically to store oxygen within these muscle cells. I told you in the definition of the respiratory pigments, those molecules which can transport or store. So ट्रांसपोर्टेशन में आपके पास हीमोग्लोबिन रेस्पिरेटरी पिगमेंट है, जबकि मायोग्लोबिन हैज द फंक्शन और द एबिलिटी टू स्टोर द ऑक्सीजन, ये ऑक्सीजन स्टोरेज में असिस्ट करता है. कमिंग टू द कॉम्पोजिशन, इट हैज अ सिंगल पॉलीपेप्टाइड चेन. जब सिंगल पॉलीपेप्टाइड चेन होगा तो आपके पास सिंगल हीम ग्रुप प्रेजेंट होगा, तो ऑटोमेटिकली इट विल हैव अ सिंगल आयरन, ठीक है. Now the amino acid number आपके पास 153 है, ठीक है, in the myoglobin. अभी just before I told you that कि आपके पास जो सिंगल पॉलीपेप्टाइड चेन है, this सिंगल पॉलीपेप्टाइड चेन है, तो सिंगल आयरन है, तो ऑटोमेटिकली जब सिंगल आयरन है तो there will only be a single oxygen binding to a single molecule of myoglobin, ठीक है. जब हीम ग्रुप आपके पास या जो आयरन है वो एक ही प्रेजेंट है तो ओनली वन ऑक्सीजन कैन बाइंड टू इट, ठीक है. द मॉलिक्यूलर मास इज 16.7 kilodaltons. नाउ कमिंग टू द स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ द hemoglobin was quaternary, जबकि आपके पास जो myoglobin है, it has a tertiary structure. Now looking at the oxygen affinity, the affinity for oxygen in the myoglobin is more. Now the reason, the general perception that comes to mind कि hemoglobin ज़्यादा oxygen transport करता है तो उसकी affinity ज़्यादा होनी चाहिए, no. When you compare these two, the oxygen affinity or attraction of hemoglobin is less as compared to myoglobin. Now the reason for this is when the hemoglobin transports the oxygen molecules in the form of oxyhemoglobin to the muscles, so it has to be released to the muscles, right? So if the affinity of the hemoglobin was more as compared to the myoglobin, so the oxygen molecule would not have been released. वो फिर आपके पास ऑक्सीहीमोग्लोबिन ही रहता और मसल्स में या मायोसिन में आपके पास स्टोर ना होता. और अगर मायोग्लोबिन की if the affinity of myoglobin for oxygen was less, so it could not take up the oxygen molecules from the hemoglobin. So this is the reason that the hemoglobin has less oxygen affinity while the myoglobin has more oxygen affinity. Now, at what pressure the release of oxygen occurs? Basically, the oxygen is stored till it is required by the muscles, and it is released when the pressure is less than 20 millimeters of mercury. So it will be released from the myoglobin, and it will break off from the myoglobin and will be released to the cell. Now, coming to the types of myoglobin, there is a single type, the usual tertiary globular type. Okay. Now, this is a table which represents the differences between both the respiratory pigments. If you people remember this table, it will become easy for you to remember the lecture. Okay. Also, there sometimes the question comes that differentiate between the hemoglobin and the myoglobin. So this table will help you in that. Now यहाँ पे आपके पास characteristic है. Here it is the hemoglobin, and यहाँ पे आपके पास these are the myoglobin. ठीक है. Now occurrence, I told you hemoglobin is in RBCs, जबकि myoglobin is in the muscle. Coming to the function, the hemoglobin helps in the oxygen transport, while the myoglobin helps in the oxygen storage. Coming to the composition, it has 4 polypeptide chain. On the other hand, myoglobin has a single polypeptide chain, and it has 4 iron or heme group present. It has a single iron. The number of amino acid in hemoglobin is 574, jabki in myoglobin it is 153. The molecular mass is 64 kilodaltons of hemoglobin, while the myoglobin is 16.7 kilodaltons. The structure of hemoglobin is quaternary, while it is a quaternary, and while that of the myoglobin is tertiary. So the oxygen binding, or the number of oxygen molecules that bind to the hemoglobin is 4, while the number of oxygen molecules binding to myoglobin is 1. It has less, the hemoglobin has less oxygen affinity, while the myoglobin has more oxygen affinity. Now the pressure at which the oxygen is released from the hemoglobin, it is 60 or less than 60 millimeters of mercury, and the pressure from which oxygen is released from myoglobin, it is 20 millimeters of mercury. There are 2 types of hemoglobin, type A and F, while there is a single type of myoglobin, that is the normal. Okay. Now there is a small topic, it's not in your book, but it is better to understand the differences. It is better to know that which other types of respiratory pigments are there. It helps in the MCQs a lot. Now there are certain respiratory pigments in other organisms. The first one is the hemoerythrin. Okay? First one is called as the hemoerythrin. Now it occurs in the marine worms and the brachiopods. It has when it is oxygenated, means उसमें oxygen है, so it will be purple, pink या violet in shades में. It will have the color. ठीक है? जबकि when it is deoxygenated, it will be colorless. It will have no color. It has also, I told you that जितने भी respiratory pigments हैं, they have a metallic group. इसमें आपके पास 2 iron present हैं. Now another respiratory pigments in these organisms are mostly the invertebrates हैं यहाँ पे आपके पास. So there is the chlorochlorine. ये आपके पास annelids जो earthworm वगैरह हैं, इनमें मौजूद होते हैं, and other marine worms. ठीक है? Now when they are oxygenated, so the color will be green, and when it is deoxygenated, so they may be colorless or light greenish. कुछ books में colorless लिखा हुआ है, कुछ books में greenish लिखा हुआ है, light greenish लिखा हुआ है. So that means they could be colorless or light greenish in color. Now it has a single iron molecule. Another respiratory pigment is the hemocyanin. It occurs in the crustaceans and the mollusks. The color is basically, when it is oxygenated, it will be blue, and when it is deoxygenated, it will have no color. And यहाँ पे जो iron group है, यहाँ पे जो metallic group है, वो है 2 copper molecules. ठीक है? इसमें आपके पास copper present है. Now अगर हम hemoglobin की color की बात करें, तो इसका जो original color है, it is basically pink. ठीक है? Darker shade. और जब ये oxygenated होता है, तो it becomes red. Means जो आपके पास इसमें oxygen add होता है, तो the hemoglobin color becomes red. ठीक है? That is why your blood color is red. And when it is deoxygenated, it becomes dark red. Agar if you see the veins on your hand, they seem blue in color. It is not blue in color. It's not that when blood is drawn for different tests from a person, the blood that comes out is blue in color. It is not blue. It is extremely dark in color. And because they appear blue, so we assume symbolically that the deoxygenated blood is blue in color. But in actual or in reality, it is dark color. Okay? आपकी ये जो वेन्स है विच आर विजिबल ऑन योर हैंड्स, जिससे आप यूजुअली ब्लड ड्रॉ करते हैं फॉर डिफरेंट ब्लड टेस्ट, तो the very dark color blood comes out of it and it is because it is the deoxygenated blood. ठीक है, और जो oxygenated blood है वो आपके पास it will be red, normal red आपके पास जो होता है. ठीक है, so thank you, this was about today's lecture. Tomorrow we are going to start with the disorders, which are slightly easier than the rest of the topics that we've studied so far.